So today I want to talk about the state of school education of IT or computer education in schools, let's say. Um, I've kind of touched on this before. I even had a kind of discussion about it in a live stream, my last and really only proper live stream, right at the end. So even fewer people would have seen that, then they're probably going to see this video about it. And I just kind of want to distill down how I feel about it. So first of all, I'm going to say about IT education in schools, my own history, my own experience of it, and then I'm going to sort of say what I think should happen. Well, I certainly think whatever happens, if anything happens, is better than maybe the state of computer education as I had it. I'm not exactly sure how it is now, but I will kind of say what I think is happening now. Now, I might be wrong on this. Um, my word is not gospel, but it certainly shaped my experiences, what I do now, or my experience have shaped what I do now. And I'll try not to ramble too much, but it's a discussion, really, isn't it? It's just a talking point, so we'll see how this goes. Anyway, so when I first learnt computers at school, of course, it would have been the 1990s. So this was an era where really the computers were going from command line, let's say, from having to program in what you want to be displayed on the screen, so to speak. And in the UK, where I live, where I'm from, and where I grew up, um, in the 1980s, that actually was a big part of computing, including in schools. So the BBC, if you know what the BBC is, the British Broadcasting Corporation, had their own computer called the BBC Micro, and there was another thing called the Acorn, I think. And these were distributed to schools, I think maybe free of charge, I don't know, or subsidised by government. And effectively, I think it had their own programming language, BBC Basic, so the basic type programming language, whatever. And really, the whole thing about it was not to get children watching video on their computer, not to, of course, this is the pre-World Wide Web, not to, do Word documents necessarily, but to learn to program or do basic programming, learning basic program concepts, having feedback for what you put in the computer. So by the time I got to school, in the 1990s, of course, we now had Windows 95, which obviously followed on from, I think, the first sort of Windows graphical environment. Was it Windows 3.1 or I don't know, who cares? And Windows 95 obviously took over the world, really, for home computing and business computing, let's say. But it also took over schools, certainly in the United Kingdom, in the UK. And so it was always interesting to me. The first experience I had of Windows 95, or really a computer desktop, we did have technically one at home, but nobody ever used it. I don't know why. Maybe people were scared of it, didn't want the command line, so this would have been pre-Windows 95. I don't even remember what it was. I think I broke the keyboard by putting polish in it, whatever. So at school, they showed me how to use Windows 95. Now, obviously, using Windows 95 is like putting a square block in a square hole. I mean, it's not, it's just intuitive. And I'm not even saying that in a complimentary way. It's a click, drop, drag, put in some, text into a Word document. That's Windows as a whole, really. You do not have to teach Windows 95. It is just by design, and it's deliberate, and that's, to be commended, actually. And I know that previous to this, you had Apple computers with their graphical environment. So this was the age of the graphical environment for home computing. Now, what's interesting about that is it's not that schools just took on Windows computers and Windows Windows desktops and things like this, and got away from the command line. It's that first of all they thought they had to teach you how to use a mouse. Again, you put your hand on a mouse and you move a mouse and you click a button and it does it. there's no syntax, there's no real understanding. It's just a kind of natural and obvious action. It's intuitive, it's self-explanatory. Why do you need to teach me that? And yet, how ironic. I had a keyboard there, obviously, with the computer. Did they teach me how to touch type? No. They spent hours showing me how to use a mouse. Can you believe that? Now, maybe that is the same experience of other people. I don't know. Now, remember, this is the 1990s, so it was kind of it felt new, it felt exciting. Windows 95, wow, all this visual graphics, all these screensavers. So from there on, I had basically learnt nothing, knew nothing about computers. What I was taught was what really anybody would already understand. I mean, they say, don't they, give a child an iPad and they already know how to swipe a screen because it's self-explanatory. But that's a state of computing then in like primary school, so the first few years of school. So then it was really, I had no real interaction with computers. We did no computer work, and that's fine at primary school. So then at secondary school or middle school, we had an interesting thing. So I moved from my area, moved to another area, which was a bit more backward, let's say, but whatever. They had technology. Anyway, and in this school, they had two computer rooms. The first computer room was their original computer room that had older Apple type computers, you know, like the box ones with a floppy disk drive, whatever, I can't remember what they're called, you know, like almost the 1980s ones or early 90s equivalents. And then they were building a new computer room. They called it the computer lab. Why they called it the computer lab, I guess it sounded trendy, and they had Windows 95 computers, and then it would be Windows 98 computers. And what's funny was, when I got there, we weren't allowed in the computer lab. They'd basically finished it. They had all these computers, and you're not allowed in the computer lab. Only senior students allowed in the computer lab. We don't want you breaking the computers. You don't know how to use computers, whatever. It's like, oh, okay. You're only going to be allowed in the computer room, where it's like cramped, stuffy, dark, and you're only going to use the Apple computers and floppy disk drives. Now, actually, on the face of it, not a bad thing. But of course, this was still the era of graphical environments, so it was a graphical environment, and they taught us how to use a word processor, okay? The amusing thing about this, our teacher had just contempt for us, absolute contempt. You don't know anything about computers, you don't know what you're doing, you're only good enough to be in this class. You're not allowed in the computer lab. So we were shown how to use a Word document, or not really shown. We weren't really shown anything. I still don't know to this day what we were being taught, because I don't remember any of it. All I remember is you saved your work on the computer floppy, and then next week you would take your computer floppy out of a big box full of computer floppies that had your name on it. You'd try and load it into the computer, and it would be blank. And then everybody else's would be blank. And the teacher would be very annoyed, be like, well, you don't know how to save. You're obviously saving incorrectly. Now, basically, this whole stuff was just faulty. There were huge problems, large number of crashes on these computers. I don't know what was going on. Maybe you shouldn't put a load of floppies in a box together. Whatever. Nobody's work had been saved. Maybe somebody malicious come along and deleting them. I don't know. Who cares? Anyway, he would get very annoyed. It would be skill issues, user error. Of course, he knew nothing about computers. I seem to remember he knew nothing. Probably even less than the people who knew little or nothing anyway. So there we go. That was then. And then we did go to the computer lab eventually when they realised nobody was getting any work done, couldn't get any work done. And again, we were shown how to use Microsoft Word. Not even really shown Excel. We were shown nothing. We learnt nothing. No programming, no command line, of course, nothing. Then we went to high school. And what happened? I can't even remember. For the most part, I spent 2 years in one of these computer classes, and I don't even remember what we were taught. I don't even remember them trying to teach us HTML, maybe like, again, Word documents, browsing the internet. That just seemed to be a thing. That was it. Learn how to browse the internet. Again, what is going on in the minds of school educators? I really don't know. So I learnt nothing. I learnt absolutely nothing. Still no command line, still no programming, not even like markup language like HTML. Then in my last couple of years of high school, they started trying showing us how to do HTML websites. Except they didn't really care. They didn't really know. They taught us a couple of tags and they left us to it. Nobody had anything to show for it. They weren't interested. Then the most amusing thing was they were going to teach us programming. So they gave us these terrible little robot things that we had to build, and you could program them. This horrible program with some horrible syntax, probably. I can't even remember. Again, nobody learnt nothing at all. Teachers knew nothing. Absolute waste of time. So that was my education for computers. I learnt, of course, like a lot of people, more at home. And I didn't really know enough, but I could learn more at home than I could all these hours wasted. Okay. So what this was, of course, this web was getting bigger then, early 2000s, but there's no talk like web development really or anything like this, and that's fine. So where are we now? And what should be done? Well, really, as far as I'm concerned, what should happen and what should have been done is, and I'm not even advocating for Linux, but some kind of command line, okay? Like it was in the 1980s. Some kind of command line where you put stuff into a terminal and you get output. You understand how the system reacts to your inputs, okay? You understand how things work behind the scenes under the hood in a simple but principle and basic sense. Then, because you can do that, usually you will learn basic programming skills like for loops, while loops, if statements, if then, elif, and all this kind of stuff, case statements, variables, functions, etc. Basic programming principles, because the basic programming principles in some kind of basic programming language, you get feedback. Now, this is where I would advocate a command line type or scripting language, because you get, the bash shell, for example, in Linux is inextricably linked with Linux. So when you're working on the command line, you're working basically communicating with the system. It's interpreted, right? Is that right? It's reading your instruction. You don't have to compile it. You don't have to do that. You get feedback instantly. And you can write a shell script or whatever, and you can run that. But you will learn basic programming principles. The difference is with what I got, effectively, we were taught nothing, left school with nothing, and all we get told is, well, you want something, you pay Microsoft or you pay Adobe. So people are really left hemorrhaging thousands of pounds that they needn't spend on stuff that they're never going to use in their personal life. They might only get it in business, but business is an interesting one. Again, what had I learnt using a mouse or using a Word document that I couldn't have just learnt instinctively? Why is that so attractive to business? Let's be honest about it. Business, will want you to know these things, but I think it's just be assumed that you'll know these things. And really, if you can use a command line, I'm sure you can work out a text document, really, a text editor. I don't know. I all the stuff I didn't learn or did learn at school, it should just be assumed in anybody, I'm afraid, because it is self-explanatory. You can hover over a button and it tells you what it does, okay? But you're not necessarily going to know all these simple programming principles. Build your own little modules, build your own little extensible things in Linux or BSD or whatever it is. Surely that's a better skill, because then, hey, maybe the company wants you to do a bit of programming or maybe could you look at building this little script at the back end of I don't know. It just seems to me, well, you could script, maybe you could learn Python or something. Gives people fundamental principles, fundamental knowledge of computing. I mean, surely if you're an author, you've still got to understand, the basic construction of English or of a language. Surely you've got to understand what a verb is, what an adjective is. Surely these you don't just, that's what schools teach, right? They teach you the fundamentals, right? So why is it? Why is it they can't or won't do it with computing? Is it their own failures? I don't know. Is it their own lack of understanding? That just seems to me the way it is. I don't know. So why are they not doing it? I don't know. Um, Maybe it is their own skill issues. Maybe you just get your Microsoft license as a school. Somebody in finance just pays for the licenses, and the IT people just have to do it. I don't know. It just seems to me a complete indifference, lack of understanding. Now, what's the state of modern schooling? I don't know. If you look at modern schooling, all I ever hear from it is that, oh, maybe it's like web development, getting you into web development. So, but isn't it interesting? Like a lot of web developers don't really understand systems or computers at a fundamental level. Really, all they're doing is gluing stuff together, frameworks. They've probably never even seen a command line. Maybe they use a command line through, VS Code or something. Maybe that's their biggest interaction with a command line. I don't know. It's just, I mean, maybe people could say what their experience is. Maybe it's different in America. But to me, school should just be giving you the fundamental principles, and you'll be taken care of. It's a bit like learning English. If you understand English, you can write a novel, right? They don't teach you how to write a novel, but you don't know how to write English. You see what I mean? Seems to me there's a big gap here. And for normal people who are just expected to pay thousands of pounds to Adobe and Microsoft, it's just crazy that schools should not be in the business of servicing, the balance books of Microsoft and Adobe and companies like this. They should be teaching people fundamental principles. Then they've got the choice. Maybe the tools they've got, on the command line, or the tools they've got in Linux, for example, or they're not necessarily going to build a Photoshop or something. They're going to, spend money to have that, but they'll never have the option. And it's always amusing, like you think of Raspberry Pi, right? So I remember some years ago, just after I left school, the Raspberry Pi was going to be brilliant for children coding. And nothing really came of that, it seems to me. Really, all that happened was people who wanted to use a Raspberry Pi as a computing device for their niche bought them, and schools didn't really do anything. I don't know. But I just I don't understand it. I don't understand why schools are in the business of helping businesses like Microsoft and not helping people understand principles of computing. Maybe that's just the way the world works. I don't know. Um, is there really much more to say about it? I mean, I could just keep going on and on, but I don't know. I don't know what's the real state of these things. Anyway, you can do the fake YouTube thing. You can like, you can comment, subscribe. I hope that kind of makes sense. But see what you think. And anyway, I'll leave it there.